Hey, this is Chad. We're here with the CRP, and we are talking about white supremacy and the recent mass shootings and mass shootings in general. I'm very fortunate to have with us special guest today, Vox Rush Booker. Scott Anthony is with us as well, and Amanda Schutte. So, how's everybody doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on today.
Same. Thank you for being here.
I refuse to say I'm great, but I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a trying and hectic weekend in the United States would be an understatement. We have a special guest with us today. Vox, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first, so that people know who you are, and then we'll go from there. Okay.
Absolutely. I live in Bloomington, Indiana. I was the original founder of Bloomington's Black Lives Matter. Parted ways since then. I recently ran for city council at large. I didn't get the Democratic nomination, and I'm also a community activist. I chair a commission for the county on affordable housing, and I just try to make sure that I'm involved in giving back to my community.
And Amanda, the crowd hasn't had a lot of opportunities to see you either here recently. I know you've been super busy with everything in your life. So go ahead and tell everybody just a little bit about yourself again, so they know who you are.
My name is Amanda Schutte. I'm also a community activist. When I was little, I grew up, I just wanted to help people, and I didn't know what that meant. And no one told me you could be an activist when you grew up. So a couple years ago, I figured that out, thankfully. And since then, I founded a couple of nonprofits. I really try to remove barriers and provide the knowledge that I pick up along the way to anyone that can use it free of charge. So I appreciate coming on, and I appreciate being a part of what we do.
Well, and I appreciate everyone's abilities, and I appreciate the efforts that everyone takes to be part of a community and to make a stronger, better community for everyone. So let's jump right in, guys. Look, this weekend was, to say that it was horrific is an understatement, and I really don't know exactly where to even begin to express my outrage and disgust for what's happened. But I think probably what we need to do is we need to talk about where is leadership, what's going on that's causing this, and what's happening with this drastic rise in white supremacy, or is it something that's always been here? I'd love to hear from Vox on this, so I'm gonna solo him in and give him the floor for a while. It's all yours, Vox.
Well, I think the answer to that, in short, is this isn't anything new. It's what's always been. What's new is today that we have social media, that we can instantly disseminate information to each other. It's not filtered through the lens of media that may be biased. Black communities, from Reconstruction throughout Jim Crow and desegregation, have always had to deal with terrorism. Whether it be from the Klan or just other people in the community, it's nothing new. It may be that we have folks like President Trump who are all fanning the flames, but he definitely didn't start the fire. So we need to look at it through that. This has been it's been an ever-occurring thing. Really, since white men have landed on this continent, they have been killing in mass. So it's not a new phenomenon. The difference is that we were allowed to kind of have the wool over our eyes for a while and think that it was something that we had moved past. We saw the historic things like the election of the first Black president. And there were a lot of folks that were content and complacent to think that we were a post-racial society. And all we're seeing is that nothing's new.
So one of the things we do on the Cage Rage podcast is that we cover boxing and boxing history. And, the same thing was said when Jack Johnson became the first ever Black heavyweight boxing champion. Racism's dead. We've got a Black champion now. And clearly, he was also arrested and just recently pardoned. He was also arrested for transporting white women across state line. So Yeah, I'm not the one to address this, obviously. Amanda, can you jump in on this?
Well, I think what Vox is saying is pretty accurate. Just like he said, from Reconstruction through Jim Crow and now, and it's not just been physical terrorism. I think just because bullets leave bloody bodies, we pay a little bit more attention to the fact that most of them are black and brown. But we're not talking about the environmental racism. We're not talking about redlining. We're not talking about economic racism. Those are terroristic ideologies. Those are literally, I want you to do worse so you aren't okay, right? I don't want you to participate on my level. And it's the same root theology that exists in the white supremacists that we see that are going out there and are shooting up communities of color. I mean, when you have 6 out of 9 victims are people of color, obviously there was a decided goal in that situation. And so for us to sit here and say that, well, it's white terrorism and it's domestic terrorism and people are just now outraged, I think that's a completely false narrative to paint, and it's almost gaslighting, because people of color have been screaming about this for a really long time. And just like Vox said, with the advent of social media, being able to put a hashtag behind something and then search it, we instantly are connecting with everyone. It took a really long time for white folks to realize, wow, slavery is bad. And then it took a little less time for them to realize, okay, Jim Crow's not good. And then it took a little less time for redlining and a little less time for busing. I like to think that social media has given us the ability to learn this bag of facts as quickly as possible, but it also is going to give us the ability to change the issues that are causing this. When we do have a president that is sitting there saying, murder them, shoot them, we don't care, and offering to pay bail to people that are violent, that is not new. What's new is that the American people elected a leader that openly speaks of that. As well as I do, there have been conversations in the Oval Office and in the halls of Congress that are just as disgusting. However, they were not publicized because the president wasn't an actor. Well, except for one. So in this situation, it comes down to the fact that we have to recognize that this is a multi-level intersectional issue that crosses not only physical violence, it also is environmental, it's also economical, it's educational terrorism. When we have schools, I live on the far east side of Indianapolis. We are a majority minority community. Half of us live in Lawrence Township, half of us live in Warren Township. All of our high school students get bused to Indianapolis. It takes 2 hours each way, so the majority of them don't even bother to go to school. That in itself is also terrorism. So when you're looking at this, yes, black and brown bodies and the bodies of babies being piled up is terrifying. 87 people a day, about 100 people a day in the United States die from gun violence. You've got about 40,000 a day around the world that die just because they don't have clean water and food. The fact that we even have to argue this is ridiculous in this day. This is a ridiculous situation we're having to argue. It's very simple. We need to do bias training in schools from the get-go, bias training with police from the get-go. We need to make sure that we have the proper amount of funding so our educators have the time to pay attention to our kids when they're in school and give them what they might not be getting at home. We have to make sure that the funding is there so we have the mental health professionals in schools on police forces to respond to the kids in the community that are already struggling so they know where those things are going to happen. We need to invest in stopping police brutality, having flex officers that aren't required to wear body cameras. It is all together. It's so intersectional. You can't pull it out and say Trump's bad and talks about bad things and now we have more mass shootings. No, if you go and you look at the lists from the 1970s until now, even in 2009, you had a study come out from I can't remember if it was the CIA or the FBI, come out saying that this right-wing ideology is dangerous and going to be dangerous. Well, here we are 10 years later. We didn't fund it. We didn't fight it. We didn't invest in fixing it. And this is what we have to deal with. And they want to blame millennials, but I was 24.
Right. So, Vox, that's a lot to unpack, obviously. And, Amanda's got a brilliant mind and she's very well informed. Can you try to unpack some of that for me from your perspective and from your community's perspective. I realize that it's all about institutional racism, but we're talking about white supremacy and how that pertains to the mass shootings that have occurred in let's just say this year. Let's cut it down to just in the last month, even. Can you unpack that for me a little bit and try to help me as a white man understand A, what I can do better, and B, how do we educate each other to try and put an end to some of this, to try to make things better for everyone, people of color specifically, but for everyone, so that people can get along and you don't have this constant resistance and pushback to this. Can you unpack some of that for me?
Yes, it's definitely structural, institutional, like Amanda had pointed out. To go with the topic of boxing, my grandmother grew up with Muhammad Ali. She was bused into school in Louisville. She still refers to him as Cassius. We saw there was a point that Muhammad Ali was probably the most recognized black man on the planet, and the American government acted to make him low. When he didn't go along with those schemes, they brought him down. And that's kind of been the story of America, is that black folks have always been the second-class citizen, the darker brother. We have to remember that when the Constitution says we the people, that black folks were not intended in that. That this was a document that said we the people, that was written by slave owners. So people are very quick to want to think of America as the city on the hill, but we've never been that. It's always been a system of we have to push to get there. The Constitution didn't give blacks freedoms. The amendments didn't give blacks freedoms. We literally had to fight a civil war on our soil before blacks were granted freedom, and then only begrudgingly. So to take that to today, there's always been, I think, an insecurity that comes to white folks' mind when they see history. We teach history from a very Eurocentric. White folks were the beginning of greatness and were the inventors and the builders. So there was a great deal of emphasis and importance that white folks feel that they have, and then to see someone who's conversely always been they were slaves. Africa, was a land full of savages. So to see that there's a phrase that when you're used to privilege, equality seems like persecution. And I think that's exactly what we're dealing with, is we're seeing white folks say things like, hey, now I have to worry about making jokes at my job. Hey, suddenly now reparations is a serious conversation. They're sensing the change and the shift that's happening in our nation as people of color gain more agency and more political sway. And this is a reaction to that. There could be nothing more American than the most qualified black man that being president, being replaced by the least qualified white man. And you have so many folks that have so little, and it's very easy to scapegoat minorities, to scapegoat immigrants, to scapegoat gay folks, members of the LGBT community. And they're using that to say, hey, we realize you have problems. I mean, it may sound cliche, but it's the same thing Hitler did. You have these problems. This is the source of your problems. If we attack that, we can elevate you. So it's the same dehumanization that's always been present in America. The difference is people feel the push that we're moving towards being a more equitable society. And as blacks gain more and blacks have greater representation, and we saw it with the Oscars, people are going to push back every time we step forward. People are going to want to push it back.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. For that information. How do I say this without? It doesn't matter. I live in a community that is 98% well, okay. If you count Hispanics, that's a different case. But between black and white, it's 98% white. And then you add in Hispanics, there are almost no Asians here. I live in a rural community in north central Indiana. What is the best way for me to approach people who say things like affirmative action is reverse racism? Donald Trump is doing everything he can to help minorities because black men have the least amount of unemployment in decades. What's the answer to that I don't know how to deliver?
I think it's about creating awareness of most folks don't understand racism because they don't understand the dynamics that went into forming racism. They don't. Amanda spoke about redlining. Most folks aren't going to know redlining. They're not going to understand how the suburbs were created, how we reinforce segregation. They don't understand the discrimination that's still present today in things like housing or jobs. They don't understand that when I go to rent a property, that most of the time I'm going to be renting from a white person, and I have to think in my mind, is this person going to discriminate against me in housing? Because I've gone to apartment complexes before, and they kindly direct me towards the ghetto. So I know what it is to feel these things. It's hard to translate that to other folks without having to educate them, and there has to be a lot of seed planting. I have some friends that are on different political spectrums than me. So I can get them to connect with one piece of commonality. Maybe in this case, it's sporting, and we can talk about what Muhammad Ali went through. But once they have that one piece of connection, that seed's planted, and they'll be more receptive to that growing. So it's just a constant game of having to educate and reinforce.
That's great. Sorry, we lost Amanda for a moment there. Let me.
We lost her. I'll pop back in.
Sorry about that, guys. Sometimes there's technology glitches. Thank you for that, Amanda. What's your response to that then?
So I missed a little bit, but I heard where Vox was talking about how most people don't know what redlining is.
Yeah.
And so that's something that's really important. If you have ever heard of gerrymandering,
yeah,
a lot of people, you can relate it to white folks by telling them it's like gerrymandering, right? Because people will know what that is. And it's kind of the same concept, because drawn lines around specific areas where you want people to be and not be, that's what redlining is. So you have a situation where you've got these certain communities that get funding and then certain communities that don't, very much like what I was talking about here with the schooling. So if you had asked Vox about how do you advocate in your community and how do you have those conversations because it's a mostly white community. Well, in my community, because I grew up in the exact same situation, the county I come from was 97% white, very conservative, one-sided campaigns and candidacies, one-side electoral representation. Mm-hmm. And you literally just have to you kind of become the crazy person on the street, right? Oh, yeah. Because everybody's like, but that doesn't matter here. Well, but it does, though, because that's why we have a 97% white community. Most communities don't naturally stay 97% white in the migratory society that we live in now. So you have to go back and you have to look at that and go, okay, well, what exactly is causing my community to be 97% white? Is it opening? Is it welcoming? Are there safe spaces for people of color? Are white folks approaching appropriately, or do you have white savior kicking in, right? Do you have white folks coming in going, oh, I can fix this. I know how to do this. This is my area of expertise. This is what I went to school for. This is my experience. Let me do this for you real quick and it's going to be better. But that's not how this works. You enter in a community of color and you sit back and you just watch. You help with whatever needs helped with and you learn, because as much as you may be educated on that topic, you're not educated on that topic as a person of color. You can say, I have read the books and I know the numbers and all the things, but you can never, ever, ever say you walked into a bank or an apartment complex and got pushed towards the projects. That's something you're never going to understand. And to be able to truly help, you have to be able to understand that. So you can't walk in with your big degree and say, I'm going to fix it. It doesn't work that way.
Okay, what about the people that we encounter, and I encounter this pretty much on a weekly basis anyway, that say things like, this is America, everybody has the same chances. And when I say, well, what about voter suppression through legislation? And as you said, through gerrymandering. And what about when I explain these kinds of things to people in my community? And I don't want to paint my community as all bad, because there are wonderful people in this community. There are great people here.
Indiana is full. It's full of white moderates, right? It goes back to what Martin Luther King Jr. was saying, letter from a Birmingham jail, talking about the white moderate and the person that literally just silences compliance. And when you live in communities like ours, when someone gets hurt, everybody bands together. They come out strong and they try and help them. A child gets sick, they come out strong, they try to help them. You know, there's a fire, there's a natural disaster. Our communities are tight knit and close and overall good people, but they're still white moderates, and they're still dangerous because they vote from a place of ignorance. You get to a point where people don't even know what they don't know. That whole I don't see color concept that a lot of the people in our communities subscribe to, that's not real. That's not real. You can't say I don't see color, because everyone does.
Okay.
It's in everything you do. It's in your system.
Okay, so having said that, I'm sorry to have interrupted, but I want to jump and make sure that I get this right. When I speak to somebody and I tell them that, there are a lot of people who will feel very, very much insulted by that, and that's just a fact of life. Vox, what do you have to say about that? When you bring this topic up and you say, you know, we're victimized through institutional racism, whether you believe it or not. What is the deterrent to stop that conversation and change the conversation to a place where we can build bridges instead of walls? Or do we suffer through it? What's your idea? Go ahead.
So, you know, Amanda comes from a place where she's educated on the subject. She's taken the time to do the research necessary to have an understanding and probably some self-inspection. Well, I don't want to speak for your experience, but that's what I hear. A lot of folks haven't begun that process. You can take a phrase as simple as white privilege, and folks are automatically defensive and openly hostile towards it. Because I think the term white privilege is almost a misnomer, because we're not saying that folks are receiving some privileged special treatment. What we're saying is that white folks get to have baseline human decency when they encounter with folks. When they walk into a store, no one stops and says, hey, is this person following me because I'm white? So often when you tell folks about white privilege, you're going to hear how they don't have any special treatment. It's getting them to have the base understanding that when we say white privilege, we're not saying you're getting a special code. We're just saying that you're getting the same baseline treatment that every human should have. When you talk about people say this is America, we all have the same chance, you have to get folks to understand basic things and kind of the positionality in the world. Everyone is going to have different privileges that come with their life. I have a level of privilege with being a male that someone who's a female may not have. So having to getting them to understand different ways that privilege affects your life is something that can be key, because it takes away the defensiveness. We can talk about the able-bodied privilege. There's I'm a child that always had two parents at home for the most part. There were lots of different aspects of privilege that people can understand, and then getting them to apply what they do get to things that they don't understand, because that's really the only way that you're going to build the bridge. And don't get me wrong, some folks are willfully engaged, and I can get along with anyone as long as they're willing to respect me and recognize my humanity. When someone isn't willing to give into that baseline simple thing, then it's best not to engage. I can't miss a friend that I never had. and I need to go on and worry about the work that promotes my people. But for those folks that are willing to engage, one of the things that you can do as folks that are white identifying can be that advocate voice. Sometimes it's much easier to hear something from another white person because there's not the inherent defensiveness that you get from engaging another black person. Another thing we can do is ask questions. I ran for office this year. One of the most simple ways that you can probably affect change is to do just simple engagement with elected leaders. Ask them when's the last time they had a black person at their house. You can be in probably some of the most liberal communities, and I think you would be shocked by the response that most white officials would give. Ask them what they think the most pressing concern of the black community is, because going to people in positions of power and asking them to even consider the position of black people or other marginalized groups is another way of planting that seed.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the things that I guess I've tried to do when I have these conversations with people in my community who I don't consider them, I know that it is racist. Scott and I had a conversation not long ago where we said, of course we're racist. It's almost an innate trait within us to be racist. And the difference is are you a recovering racist, or are you willfully racist? I think that's maybe the difference there. Not that one is that much better than the other, but I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to figure it out. There are a lot of people in my community who are simply, as you said, utterly defensive about any of it, and they don't want to hear it. And they say, I work beside black people every day. I commute with them. I have no problem with them whatsoever. Tell me how that leads us back to our topic of white supremacy. Let's get there, and then let's talk about the shootings.
Well, first let me talk about when you engage someone that says, "Hey, I'm not racist. I have a black friend." There's always the argument, "I have a black family member." Explain to them that because we have such binary thinking, we see racist folks as bad people, and I know I'm not bad, so therefore I can't be a racist. A way to frame that is, okay, are you being anti-racist, or are you just going along with the status quo? Because it's not enough that people aren't racist. They need to be adamantly anti-racist, because that's the only way that moves change forward. A lot of how this ties into white supremacy is the white moderate who is more devoted to peace, which is that absence of tension, rather than justice, which sometimes isn't always easy. It's saying you need to not just go with what you can ignore. You need to speak out. We've had recently, you guys have probably talked about it, we've had the white supremacists in our local community farmer market. There were a lot of people that took the stance of, well, just ignore them, don't confront them, or don't shop with them. You can't just you can't ignore racism, because what's going to happen is you're tolerating intolerance, and the intolerant people are going to come for you eventually. So it's about making sure that you actively taking steps to be anti-racist, and that you're making sure that your community is flagging folks who are threats, who are exposing hateful rhetoric, because we often want to shield this in terms like thought policing, or we want to talk about free speech. But the reality is that these things are incitement towards violence. People, I can go around or someone can go around and talk about white supremacy all day long, and they may never actually be the one that engages in the violence. But the people that they hear, the people that they bring into the flock, may be the next mass shooter.
Yeah, guilty as charged. We had a conversation on Facebook where I think maybe possibly our first introduction was that you said that I was suspect for the statements that I had made. The statements that I had made were that these people have done nothing wrong. They're selling vegetables, and until they act according to whatever dialogue they believe is fit, they have done nothing wrong. And so there's nothing legislatively you can do about that. Agree with inciting comes with that. I understand that. But can you relate to the idea that it's a very slippery slope to say, you can't say that anymore. You can't belong to this. You can't belong to that, because that jeopardizes free speech. And that's a slippery slope in and of itself. And I'd like to hear from you and Amanda both on that. And if Scott could chime in, I would like to hear that as well. I'm going to give you guys each your solo. Who wants to go first?
Let me go first where I have the thought in my head. It's okay.
Yeah.
A lot of folks are going to say free speech. I think that we're talking about intimidation and public accommodation, which are things that our nation dealt with not long ago when we were trying to integrate. Basically, what people are saying is it's like this. If you go on a street corner and you say that you feel like all black people should be executed, should be deported, I'm a fool to think that when you go around to your corner stand and I go to buy food from you, that food is going to necessarily be safe for me to even eat. You've just intimidated me in a de facto way. It doesn't matter if you haven't said it at the farmer's market. If everyone hears you say it, it's still an intimidation. We dealt with the Klan doing this, where they would tell folks that if you go to vote, that we're going to come back to your house later and kill you. They weren't at the polls intimidating people away from voting, but they were still able to do it. So to think that we have this narrow area that, okay, you're in this confined space of the marketplace, and since you're not actually being hateful in the marketplace, everyone should just be okay with your comments outside of that, is kind of myopic. It's very, very narrow-minded. I mean, I don't stop representing my job when I go out into the public and say hateful, vile things. That's going to reflect on my employer, whether I was at my job or not. And it's the same thing here.
Thank you for that. That really draws a good picture for me to try and look at things from another angle. I appreciate that. Amanda, do you want to sound off on that as well?
Well, I just think, what Vox saying is completely accurate. It's very narrow-minded to look at it that way. And then, going back to his analogy of having a farmer or a vendor say something about a specific group of people and then other people overhearing it, the problem that we're having right now is the people that overheard it are okay with people that are different than them getting tainted goods, right? So that's kind of how that structure looks. So if you're willing to still go shop there after you've heard it, knowing that if a person of color shops there, their food could hurt them, you're willing to support that system of injustice. And that goes back to exactly what you said. You must be anti-racist. There's no such thing as non-racist. There's racist and anti-racist. There is no middle. We can just call that a white moderate, because that's what that is. That's that middle. They aren't always white, but that's the descriptor that they've been given historically. And so, I mean, for me, it just goes back to it's like the Israel boycott. It's like boycotting anything, Right now we have so many issues and so many things that if we really stopped and tried to stop buying from everyone that does bad things, we would have to go pretty much to a self-sufficient society. But in mass, if we're taking steps, then we can get somewhere, which is why I think what's happening in Bloomington is kind of great. It's
Yeah.
almost like those little wins, when they were fighting when the civil rights fight was happening. It wasn't just like, oh, Rosa Parks happened and then some things went down. No, there were small cases, just like what's happening at the farmers market, that were tried and won all over the country to set tiny little precedents to allow the whole situation to evolve. And that's where we are right now. We're going around the country and setting small precedents. So when it finally comes to fruition, we can go and say we have national data showing that this is an issue and showing that white supremacy is causing direct harm to people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color across the board are suffering from this. And it's not just everyone you would think, right? So you trying to talk about your friends that you can't talk to, and you're not really sure if it's worth the headache, right? Because you don't know if they'll hear you. I have a very, very good friend who, for most people that look at her and her husband and their kids, they're just a white couple that lives in the city. But her husband is a Muslim refugee that's here as a citizen, that was here as conditional citizenship. He was granted citizenship during the Bosnian War. And they worry all day, every single day right now. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to his mother right now? So we have to stop. I see so many people that they're like, oh, but our community is white. Is it though? Is it really? Because you probably don't know, because you aren't having those hard conversations. I think if you start having those hard conversations, you'll find out it's not quite as white as you think it is.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back to the topic that we eventually are going to cover here, which is mass shooting and how mass shooting actually takes hold, what happens, the nuances that lead to somebody being willing to go out and even anxious to do so, to go out and kill numbers of innocent people for seemingly no reason. They probably have reasons that they believe are okay, but that's never okay, no matter what their reasoning may be. So when I look at this, I realize that there are more steps I need to take as a white male, specifically in my area. Running for office obviously is one of those. There was not one blue vote on my county ballot when I voted, so I just didn't vote anything. And some of those people are blue because I know them. One of them is my neighbor, and I know her to be very kind and loving, endearing human being, but they can't even run Democrat because if they do, they're guaranteed to lose no matter what, which goes back to gerrymandering and voter suppression. And we can talk about all of that stuff, but I'd like to get to let's get specifically into mass shooting and how white supremacy to mass shooting. Are you okay, Amanda?
Yeah, sorry, I have kids and it's the last day of summer vacation and they're all like, Mom, I need ice cream and stuff.
So let's do this first.
You're gonna have to wait.
Let me ask Scott to chime in real quickly because we haven't heard from him. I'd like to hear a little bit, and then I'd like to go back to Vox. And so I'm going to put you guys on solo, and I'm going to let you both communicate about mass shooting and how all of this relates to white supremacy. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. Hold on, Scott. I'm totally hijacking you really quickly because before we get into the mass shooting part, I really don't know how much more time I'm going to have because of my kids, and I may have to bow out. But I just want to get this out there. There are 2 points that I really would love to be made at some point today. Is the fact that they're trying to push this off all on a mental health crisis, and that is not what this is. Yes, we have a mental health crisis, but there are mental health issues all over the world, not just in America. This isn't mental health is a symptom of what we're dealing with right now. And also, I want to point out for all my white friends out there and people that are not my friends, if you say black on black crime, you're missing the entire freaking point. We had 6 shootings in Indianapolis over the weekend. It is not a mass shooting, and it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. What we're talking about is people that are purposely going out and killing people because they don't agree with who they love, what they look like, or things that they can't control about themselves. We are not talking about shootings that stem from systemic repression and from communities that are struggling to survive. If you've never lived inside of a community that is struggling to survive, you do not understand at all the difference, and I encourage you to learn about it. So I apologize. Didn't mean to hijack you. However, I needed that to get out there. And like I said, my kids I'm going to stay, but my kids might not let me.
Okay. Hey, Amanda, do you need to sign off?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and go because they're just going to get louder and I don't want to interrupt. So I'll catch up with what you guys say later, and I want to stay in touch. This is great, and you guys are awesome.
Thanks so much, Amanda. It's been wonderful having you on. We very much appreciate you. I'm sure you guys have something to say.
Just glad you were here, Amanda. Glad we did it.
I think Amanda's right.
So I'm going to turn the solo over to you guys. You're both solo on camera right now. It's all yours. We're at 41 minutes, so we've got 9-10 minutes left before we hit the hour. Go ahead and take it away. I would rather learn than talk.
I think Amanda's right. I spent many years working in mental behavioral health care. Folks that are dealing with mental illness are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than perpetrate them. We've seen this time and time again, that what's happening is people are moving in methodic, terrifying ways, and they're motivated by extremist hate. To put this off on mental illness or video games is really dismissive of communities that all over the world that struggle with violence, that have violent video games, that have the same levels of mental illness that we have, but don't have the same phenomenon. For us to say that young white men are motivated by video games and that can move them to mass violence, and not recognize that young black men have to deal with systemic poverty and oppression every day and see violence, and they're not motivated to violence. It's just dismissive and insulting. I think we have to really understand that we're seeing such a high representation of white males doing these crimes because it's become a condition of society.
Saying that, I just want to cut in real quickly and say that I think we had the argument about, do video games and movies and, watching an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, does that cause you to go out and kill someone? And definitively the answers through mountains of research were no. Does heavy metal cause you to go out and kill people? Does hip hop cause you to go out and kill people? Definitively, those answers scientifically through peer-reviewed research those answers are always no. It's been no for 25 years. It's going to continue to be no. Whether it might generate some influence, that I can't speak on. But yeah, so anyways, I want to jump in and say that real quick. Sorry, go ahead, guys.
I mean, I just want to point out, basically backing what we've been talking about, what Amanda brought up, and and I was online discussing this earlier with somebody, and it goes back to how we identify these white nationalist groups, such as Identity, Europa, and AIM, and whatnot. So basically, you get these guys that are trying to argue, well, there was a mass shooting in Chicago, and that's not in your statistics, because a mass shooting is 4 or more people, you see. Well, what I'm talking about is terrorism. What I'm talking about is shooting indiscriminately to cause terror. It's not just the deaths that happen. It's that you're trying to have this ideology that you're trying to propagate. And so I think a lot of the solution to dealing with these people is that we treat them like England and Canada and 24 other European countries do, and call these groups with your Eli Mosleys and your Patricks that want to see Jews burn, that want to see black babies starve, this is their ideology, and this is who our Nazi farmers are paying money to. This is who they are supporting. So if we call them the terrorists that they are, right? If I can coin a term, the white cis, ISIS, the white ISIS, white cis. If we can call them what they are, right? Because the moderate whites that we've been speaking about in this program today have no problem with ISIS being terrorists. And if you give money to ISIS, you are committing an illegal act. You are, in fact, aiding a terrorist, which makes you a terrorist. So if we would simply identify these groups that truly want to do harm, that truly spread those 14 words that we've talked about, that truly spread this hate, and that cause these young people. So in other words, it's not lone wolves, it's packs of wolves that are finding these wayward youth, these young men, and sending them off to do those things and instigating them. So my point is, it's not mass shootings that we're talking about. It's terrorism that we're really talking about. And those terrorist acts last year were done exclusively by right-wing extremists. So it's not a maybe, it's not a half and half, it's not a both sides are bad. No, it's not that. It's simply white ISIS is running, edited myself there. White ISIS is running amok. They're screwing things up, right?
So Scott, can I ask you this? I'm gonna interrupt you for a second because I really want to. Listen. This is something that's been brought up and brought to my attention several times, and I don't exactly know how to answer it, to be honest with you. And I apologize for that, but I don't know the best answer for it. There are a lot of people who have said to me, he was the one who incited that. Those people, no one knew that they were doing anything. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I also realized that they had tried to recruit people, that they had not served people of color, etc. And at that time, I was unaware of any of that, so I wasn't able to answer with any kind of educated idea on what it was. But what they did say was this: they said, your friend and your colleague and well, as far as I'm concerned, my brother, he incited that. He and his people incited that by bringing it to them, by going up to them and saying, you're a Nazi, you shouldn't be here, when these people had done nothing wrong except sell vegetables. Now, I'm not saying it's right, but I am saying it's a much more difficult, complex, and layered, nuanced question to try to answer by simply saying they're racist, they're Nazis, they're bad, they don't belong here, everyone should be terrified of them, and that's it. Because the fact is, if no one knew they were Nazis, how would you know to be terrorized by them? So I'll give you back the screen, but I want to bring that up because that's one of them that I've been asked several times, and I'd like to hear both of you comment on that if you would.
Yeah.
I think one of the most common deflection tactics that folks use is by calling the person that brings up racism the racist, and it's pretty much along the same lines of, well, why are you stirring things up? It's that white moderate mentality that Amanda was talking about, where folks are more devoted to there being peace, even if it's an unjust peace, and that's what we had. We knew these folks will actively recruiting folks. We knew that the FBI had outed them as having a connection to a gentleman who had not only vandalized a synagogue but had intended to use a pipe bomb there.
Wow.
So that's why when you have these folks and you learn this, you have to speak up, because what you necessarily may see in the light of the sun isn't what's happening behind closed doors. If someone has this type of violent rhetoric, the whole point of this type of rhetoric existing is to disseminate violence. So it's just the natural endpoint. So it's foolish. There was I can't think of any circumstance in society that we wait till someone has finished, like, you know, if you and I are planning to murder someone, and the police find out we're planning this, the police don't wait till we murder the person to say, okay, well, now
That's a great example.
they've done it so we can react. They stop us while we're in the planning process.
Yeah.
And that the same thing needs to be done to engage white supremacists. We need to be flagging them. We need to say, hey, we know these folks are threats. We know that the rhetoric is violent. We know that they're talking about exterminating mass amounts of people. Let's go ahead and nip this in the bud so we don't have that next mass shooting, that next terrorist act.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And I just want to say, to your point, Chad, they're not. You said they're at the, your friends at least were saying, you know, they're at the market and nobody even really knew they were Nazis until we said, first off.
Well, these are Facebook things, first of all.
Right, and I get you on that. I get you. Right. But these are people that have been known for a couple of years, not just over the past couple of months. It's that the FBI outed them. And then, honestly, Discord or Unicord Riot hacked Identity Europa and found the behind-the-scene chats where they're saying, listen, we can't say we want to kill black people. We can say we want to kill black people in Minecraft. So they've literally told them, right, there is a playbook. There is a white supremacist playbook, a kinder, gentler. That's why Sarah Dye is such a good spokesperson. She's just a hippie mama with her baby and her fruits and veggies, but she's a perfect spokesperson for them to bring in more people and to then influence those radical youth that are willing to do it. I just watched the movie called Skin. You know, they bring these homeless kids in.
Yeah.
Lamont Jenkins, I believe, is the fella. And then he's the good guy, by the way. But the supremacists bring these kids in, and then they have them. You know, it's like any gang. You have to prove yourself somehow. Maybe you have to burn a building with some Muslims in it, or you have to straight up shoot some black people, or whatever. So this is, as Bach said, this is the logical conclusion of those type of thoughts. If you want a world, if you want a country with all white people in it, you got to kill them or kick out everybody that's not white, or you don't have an all white. There's no good way to get an all white America, and there's no good all white America. Let me be clear. But here's my point. ISIS is at a booth at the farmer's market. Nobody knows. Should we just not tell you that they're members of ISIS? Because they might just be poisoning our ass. They might just one day say, you know what? Today's the day we're going to set off that rhetorical bomb or real bomb or poison some people. So just because we don't know ISIS is somewhere doesn't mean that it's the fault of the person that pointed out ISIS is there. And yes, ISIS is the same as Identity Europa.
Let's be clear about the laws that have been passed after 9/11 are absolutely about being able, because another question that comes up immediately is, well, what about the person who hacked their account? That's illegal. Well, and I understand that, because that becomes invasion of privacy issues, and that can be complicated as well. But would you rather they hack somebody that is suspected of being ISIS, find nothing, walk away from it, and no one ever knows the difference? Or would you rather a bomb be blown up in town square because they're part of ISIS? And it's really the same. The analogy is that one is the same as the other then. And that's what I think I hear you saying. And I agree with that completely. It's just a very difficult thing to get someone to sit down long enough and as Vox said, lower their defense mechanisms enough that you can actually get them to have a communication with you where this is about humanity and this is about one love and brotherhood, not about color, not about race, not about cultural clashes. This is about human beings being able to be free and live as they wish to live. Now, the rhetoric can also change and say, that's exactly right. Why can't those people at Schooner Creek Farms, why can't they think as they want to think and live as they want to live and segregate themselves? and you've answered that. Obviously, I understand that, but I'm trying to make you aware of the things that I hear as somebody who is a white man living in a rural community, and I hear it at tables at restaurants. I hear it in line at grocery stores. And, you know, to correct them, it takes more than simply saying you're a racist. Because when I say, you know, that's just racist and, you know, F you, that's not doing enough, because that doesn't change anything. And I'm still under the impression that in order to change minds, you have to change hearts. And I think the two of you are saying that BS just doesn't fly anymore, and it's too dangerous to risk that. Am I accurate in saying that?
Well, I think there are people that you can certainly change the hearts and the minds, but they have to be willing. There were some folks who are simply just not willing to make that change, and people can deflect and talk about legality. They haven't done anything illegal yet. Dr. King took this on in the letter to Birmingham jail that was referenced earlier, where he quoted St. Augustine as saying that an unjust law is no law at all. We have to understand that there is always going to be a void between morality and legality.
Yeah.
Slavery was legal. Hundreds of horrible atrocities throughout our history have been legal. So just because right now at the point that we're in, what they're doing is legal doesn't mean that it's moral and it's right. It's the duty of residents in a society to push the laws to be more just, and that's what we're doing. Is saying this is where we're at right now. We've always been a society where the law supported white supremacy. The law was founded by white supremacists on white supremacy. We're no longer going to allow that to be the status quo that's maintained, and we're going to push back against that to move forward to a more equitable, just society.
Okay, guys. So we've got 4 minutes to go here. Before we wrap it up, can the two of you, whichever, Vox, ASP, however you want to do it, can you wrap up? Can you summarize white supremacy equals mass shooting? Can you kind of summarize that in 4 minutes? I know that's very difficult.
I think it's about understanding that the nature of white supremacy is about hate and intolerance. That hate and tolerance by their nature are not things that just peacefully go about in our society. People that are full of hate are going to act on that hate. And that hate is going to come out in a myriad of ways. I know a lot of people like to frame the argument merely around gun control, and I think we should control guns, but we have to understand that hate is still going to manifest itself. Nations that have strong gun laws, nations that don't have strong gun laws, don't deal with these types of events because these events are inspired by a type of hate, an original sin that America has of racism that isn't present in other places. So we may see that there are acts of intolerance against immigrants in other places, but we don't see the same type of thing that we have here in America, which is good old-fashioned USA hatred that is always going to appeal to a certain dynamic of people, the people who feel like they're being left behind or disenfranchised or just pushed down. So when you take someone who's already in pain, that already feels like they don't have a part of the American dream, and you give them someone to scapegoat, someone to blame, they're going to, whether you tell them to or not, they're going to act. When the president of the United States talks about building walls and kicking folks out of the nation, or that they used to handle them back in the days, or we say simple things like "Make America Great Again" and evoke nostalgic memories of the 1950s. We have to realize that America has never been great for everyone living in America. The greatness of America is that we're willing to continue to be the experiment and push forward and become a more perfect union. That was the whole reason that President Lincoln knew that it was necessary that not only we end slavery, that we be willing to fight a war to do it, that we change the nature of our nation to be a better, more just place. And it's going to always be a struggle that's continuing. So white supremacy is going to continue to morph, and where folks used to be able to burn crosses on yards, today you couldn't do that. So we have mass shootings by folks that are called lone wolves. Those going to be biased in how the media and how law enforcement reacts. People who feel like they're good and just people, we need to be the wall that stands against that. We need to always be advocating for a more just, more peaceful society. But you have to understand that peace isn't only apathy. A lot of people thought that it was a peaceful thing to do to meet the white supremacists at the market and just ignore them, because that would maintain the peace. That's not actually peace. That's just a lack of tension. Peace is an active thing where you have to promote peace. So when folks go into a community and they say, hey, we're going to stand against hatred, we're going to stand against intolerance, they're the ones that are actually promoting peace. The other folks are just okay with oppression and intolerance just being under the layer of where it's noticed. Anthony could easily walk around the farmers market, whether or not he chose to speak out against Nazis, and probably not be afraid one way or the other. He has that privilege that I don't have. So when someone like Anthony, who has that privilege, is willing to stand in the gap and say, no, I care about these folks, I care about my community, I want us to be a better place, he's being a peacemaker.
I appreciate that. I mean, I'm always learning and growing. And Chad, I know you've been on a journey that, I mean, we came from a similar place, being up near the sort of Kokomo region, if you will. And in full disclosure, Vox and I had a heck of a first meeting. I think it's John Huston, the director, that has that. There's no better way to become friends with a man than to have a fight with him, And so Vox and I had, and honestly, it was a minor thing. I was arguing with some actual other entrenched racists that were defending the Confederate statute staying up and flying the Confederate flag, and Northerners were just as racist because of Jefferson. And I got down a rabbit hole and basically had said, well, at least Sally Hemings chose to come back with him from France instead of staying there. She was offered to stay, which sort of overlooks the whole Stockholm syndrome and the fact that she had family back in America to come back to, and this is all she knew. And so she did come back with Jefferson and did have kids with him. But that was probably, it was definitely a wrong way for me to look at it and think of it, whereas she was a slave. She didn't have choices and autonomy. And so Vox called me out on that. And I wouldn't let it go. I pestered the poor guy until he finally let me buy him lunch. And we hashed it out, and we've become good pals ever since. And honestly, there we are. Here we are now. Where do we go from now? I've been wrong in the past. I was raised in ways and in a community that's definitely not as progressive as I am now. Where do we go from here, right? And by listening to Vox and to others, right, then I can learn, I can do better, right? Know better, do better. That's all I can offer. And I'm going to keep I'm going to keep trying really hard. I made it the whole show without cussing, damn it.
Listen, I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank Amanda Schutte for joining in and being a part of this. Scott, always a pleasure to see you. Vox, I hope you'll come back and join us for some more of these. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to meet you. To say I'm impressed would be an understatement. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I feel like this is the kind of conversation that needs to happen over and over again. And this was the purpose of doing Three Sides to Every Story from Jump Street, was that we want to be able to let everybody tell their part of the story and address it and see if we can find common ground so that we can grow together and that we can find a place where there is true peace and true empowerment for all people and an egalitarian society that we're really striving for, even though a lot of times we might think we're there or we're starting to get close. We're much, much further than most of us recognize. Certainly more. I'm further than I had recognized. Maybe even before right now. And so I appreciate the education. I appreciate the time spent. And I hope that we'll be friends that can sit down and have dinner one day and hash out all kinds of great stuff and have debates and arguments and also have a lot of laughs together. So I appreciate both of you guys, of course, and your honor and your dignity.
Thank you both for having me here. I appreciate you, gentlemen. I look forward to doing this again.
Okay, until next time, namaste.
Namaste.